There's some new faces on the panel for today, so I'm just going to hand you over to Giuseppe to introduce himself.
Okay, so my name is Giuseppe Solazzo. I'm the head of the developing data unit. Matt spoke about the unit earlier. So we're a new team. It's a central team at DFT, set up to increase data capability. So although we are still in that phase of soul searching, we're working through broad areas. The first one is working on data intervention. So we are a cross-functional team. Whenever there's a need in terms of data, whether it is technical, like data engineering, or discussing ethical implication, or helping with procurement, we go in and help whoever is running that project. And the other broad area in which we work in alongside Matt is data strategy. Data strategy for DFT, but also what's our vision as a department for the transport sector. And with that, I'm on this panel to hijack it a little bit and ask you to give us your comments and ideas on what you would like us to do for you as a department. Thank you.
I think everyone knows Darren.
You all know me, I think, yeah.
Morning, I know quite a few of you already, but I'm Carla Jakeman from Innovate UK. So we're actually funding the Transport Data Initiative, which is a spin-off from an existing project, or a previous project, which now is closed, One Transport, that we funded in the past. So happy to take questions on competitions and our interest in this area as well.
And I think everyone knows Graham.
We do now.
We do. So, open to questions, please. Should we go for Paul and then go with the glasses? Okay, go with the glasses first.
Oh.
So I've changed my mind. Sorry.
I'm David Atkin, Transport for Greater Manchester. A lot of my experience with the data that local authorities have is organised around strategic planning, and it's quite more specific. So when we were looking at ways to improve the operational management of the network using data on a multimodal level, we came across a problem, and like a lot of people when you have a problem, turned to Google, and I was surprised at the amount of information they had, not just what they serve up through their APIs, but also the information they derive from the data that they harvest from the mobile phone devices that they're tracking. And I just wondered what was being done to unlock the data that these large corporations, these third parties hold, and what can be done to support initiatives like that, which are traditional capital projects.
Right. I'll start that and hand over to Giuseppe to finish off, if that's okay. We're very aware that big companies, non-transport companies, have a lot of transport data, such as Google, etc. And as part of the Future Mobility Regulatory Review I mentioned once or twice earlier, is that we're looking at how can we incentivise them to share their data more widely, because as you say, there's data that they're making available, but is there other data that would be useful that is currently not opened up, and we do try to engage as widely as we can with the industry and tech industry on these kind of issues, to work with them as much as we can, and we try to engage with them as much as we can to learn from what they've got and how they can help us. Have you got any thoughts, Giuseppe?
Just a quick one. So multimodal is the future, and I think it's really important to always focus on passengers and citizens. So the way people think about transport is not the way we think about transport. It's about, I need to get from A to B, and it does, I don't care which mode I'm going to travel on. Actually, most people, if you talk about mode of transport, they will just look at you and say, what's that? I think there is a big challenge in the way we engage with the private sector here. There are 2 points I think I'd like to make. The first one is procurement. Often, whenever we make agreements with the private sector, we need to develop a bit our thinking about data ownership, for example. And that's a big challenge in procurement, because clearly there is an interest sometimes in the private sector not to share that data. The big challenge to me is understanding what are the right incentives and the right regulation. And as Matt says, we are working on that. But it's really hard to think that whenever a company's business model may rely on that data, their ability to share may be incredibly reduced. So I think the question is always developing that thinking and developing concepts like, for example, data trusts. So there's the ODI is working on that. So can we create a framework that makes companies more happy, like to share data with us, local authorities and transport planners, I think.
Thank you. Thank you, Giuseppe. Graham would also like to add something here.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting question, and certainly when we look at it in the smarter traffic management context, and I think one of the key things it comes back to local authority is control and their responsibility as a network manager. How do they control when all that data is circulating and being provided directly to the road user through systems which aren't in a local authority control? And I think there are some really interesting examples coming forward about how partnerships can work. And it's going back to one of the things I was trying to push across in my presentation about collaboration between public and private sector. And there is a specific project in a European-led project called TM 2.0, which sounds really naff, but it's actually really, really promising. And it's about local traffic management control centres working with here, TomTom, and all the other data providers to actually consider about what routing means, what data sharing means, and how they can socially optimise that. So collaboratively, they both get the best results from both public and private sector. And I think for us, the challenge is to think how we actually harness that private sector data and actually make it work for us, and actually what we can offer back to the private sector control sector.
Thank you, Graham. Hopefully that answers your... Paul?
Paul Garland also. Going back to Darren, your slide, I think where it showed the policies and the services and then like the innovation, the solutions and all those things. I think there's one thing that's perhaps there's like a loop back that says where there's innovation that generates opportunities that might be new services which need new policies. And I think that also feeds back to Walter's comment earlier about and the funding question, because if we always think about they're the same policies, the same services, and we're doing them more efficiently, there will always be an expectation that you have capital funding and it will make actually a revenue saving because you're doing things more efficiently. I think the way we need to sometimes look at spinning this is there's a whole raft of new services that we as local authorities are being expected to deliver to prepare our infrastructure for connected autonomous vehicles, provide a better service to our citizens, and new different services which require ongoing funding. They require capital funding to make those things happen initially, to do the step change, but then to the ongoing revenue to carry on delivering those services. And I think we've all probably been quite guilty in the past of putting our paw in the air for capital funding to do the shiny project, but actually we need to spin that into say this is a new service we are now delivering, and the funding that needs to go with it. And local politicians having to make that choice: do we fund this service and do we run this service ongoing, or do we actually not make that step change at all?
Yeah.
I think to add to that, I think you're absolutely right. And I think there's an increasing dichotomy of we still live in a world where capital is easy to get and revenue is hard, but actually we're being pushed into service delivery, not asset ownership, and that's an issue. But I think we should not forget the power of technology and the power of technology-based systems to save revenue, to allow us to do things more effectively. And I think one of the really strong drivers has to be finding ways in which we can do the day job more effectively and more cheaply and save revenue in some areas that can then be released to do new things. And certainly Graham mentioned the 32 CITS projects that we're funding, doing small-scale interventions across the kind of CITS technology piece. And some of those, particularly around asset management and car parking, are showing really positive opportunities to do the day job in a more effective way and to think more creatively about how you use data to actually reduce your ongoing revenue costs. But yes, it absolutely is a challenge. Yeah.
We're talking about 21st or 20th century economists. I think one of the issues here is the way procurement, sorry, I'm going to bang on procurement, it's been thought is still that of the old economy, right? And I think we're still in need of developing the thinking around how do we make those new services, and how do we procure them. I'm having the same conversation. I'm a hospital governor, and we're talking about procuring digital services for the next 20 years. Well, the question is, should we procure them for 20 years, or how do we do that in a way that enables to do small changes along the way? Sorry for.
Okay. Over to you, Carl.
A couple of things really. I would say that it all comes down to the business model as well. So when you're looking at that project, to really make sure that the business model looks at how it can be exploited further down the line. But I would really encourage local authorities, as we always do at Innovate UK, to work with SMEs, because then you've got that ability to continue past the end of the project, and it's more likely to be able to happen. There's quite a few of you in here who have worked with SMEs on some of our projects, and I cannot stress how valuable that can be.
Can I just add something to that, sort of slightly off the original question, but you talk about working with SMEs there. It came up at a workshop with the British Standards Institute, which some of you, at least one of you, attended, and it all came up about actually the importance of importance of engaging with not the usual suspects. So actually, you've got an active SME sector in the UK, and don't forget your local universities. You know, we have some world-leading universities in the UK, source of expertise, loads of bright people in them, you'd hope to, being universities, who are doing catapults as well. And so you've got people doing masters, PhDs, and work with them to influence their agenda and actually set out problems they could do in their PhDs. We're increasingly doing that in the department by sponsoring certain studies and trying to build up relationships with universities. I know big companies such as Rolls-Royce have been doing this for years, and they have kind of ongoing relationships with universities which last 10 years. So these are the kind of things that I think we need to start thinking about in the public sector, rather than just going to the big suppliers.
Can I just make a gratuitous plug?
Yes, please do.
A quick gratuitous plug for the Transport Technology Forum, which will be getting more active through the year. Now we're in the process of relaunching it, and this will be the forum where hopefully we can get local authorities together to share experience and share best practice in meeting some of these challenges. But it also forms that conduit back to government and back to some of the work that we're doing centrally in government, and we can have that two-way debate through the TTF. And I think government would do well to understand more of the practicalities of being a local authority and managing these issues. And again, it would do local authorities good to hear more about the kind of work that's happening in government that could benefit them. So yeah, plug for the TTF.
My question is just linked to something that you said in your presentation, Matt, where you were saying a lot of the most valuable data is kind of held by third parties and stop trying to tap into that. And you were saying about potentially regulating to do that. I was wondering if you could be any more specific on what that regulation might look like.
Oh, thank you, Chris. It's too early to say. I think we have to be careful about jumping to the conclusion quite quickly. We kind of now really understand what the opportunities are, what the challenges are. But actually, there's loads of different options we could take here, some of which could be regulation, some of which could be voluntary approaches, codes of practice, value sharing models, in terms of procurement and stuff like that. And I think we need to put them all on the table, work through them, analyse them, rather than sort of jump to the end and say the answer is definitely regulations, because there's regulations have their role. We decided to do, our ministers decided to do that for the bus industry. After several years of trying to get them to share their data, eventually it was decided we needed regulations. But regulations take time, they're time consuming, resource intensive, and also you've got to make sure that they are future proof. Because the way things are moving so quickly that we can't we need to have agile frameworks that can cope with this pace of change, and that we don't sort of lock ourselves into something. Because I'm increasingly becoming kind of aware of myself that actually the way our transport system is actually a lot to do with a product of our regulatory framework. A bus is a bus because it has to do certain things and it has to register, meet these regulations. And actually, there could be a lot more flexibility in what's offered in terms of public transport, in terms of minibuses and buses. But the currently regulatory framework kind of constrains that. So it could be a mix of different things. It could be some targeted regulation, or it could be some reform of regulation and some deregulation to get a bit of flex and agility into the system. So loads of options on the table. Let's keen to work with everybody on how we can actually decide what we do, but it's too early to tell.
Just a quick comment on that. Sean from the City of York.
Oh, hello.
There's a lot of talk about getting the data from third parties or collecting it ourselves. Have we looked at the members of the public, us, asking us to deliver the data?
That's a very good question. Yeah, because this point there is the fact that actually the third parties hold lots of data, and the ODI summit earlier in the year, there was quite a kind of emphasis. There was kind of a thought circulating around that actually, rather than getting them to share their data, because that actually really, really difficult. These are big global companies that have made their business models on collecting data. So to be fair to them, why would you then share that valuable data? There's a question is that do local authorities and public sector, cities, etc., start collecting their own data through various sensor technologies and stuff like that, and actually, or crowdsourcing, which I think is what you're talking about, which I'm not an expert on, but that's something I think we need to explore. Have you got any thoughts on that, Giuseppe?
No, just maybe one link into the fact that we are leading as a department on the grant challenge, the base grant challenge. So there are opportunities in there to actually work on that specific aspect. The question about user-generated data is always very interesting. People don't talk about data as common people outside this room. So it's always about trying to make sure that we give anyone some benefit. So we were talking about crowdsourcing things like National Travel Survey, for example. So what is the right rhetoric to be used with the public in order to do that?
Incentivize and then give us the data.
Yeah.
Thank you. Guy in the green shirt with the red tie.
Dennis the Menace.
Sorry. Just jumping in there, Sunil Blair of Cromwell City Council. Just to make a couple of points the panel's already made, and to just pick up on that, where we were talking about working in collaboration. Can't I pick that up? Collaboration in the previous projects that we've done, we talked about having to increase our infrastructure, looking at revenue and how we manage that. Working with motor manufacturers, there's a lot of data that will come out of the vehicles of future that are already is going to be useful for what we're looking for. Yeah. That will send, as I think, there were two CAD projects that we worked on, that will give us the data and the information that we need, rather than having to spend more money to try and increase that infrastructure. But what I also found out is that a lot of authorities who are involved in some of this development work are aware of the future emerging technologies, but there are a lot of authorities who aren't aware, and they don't know where to go next. And I think that's where the forums like these would help to try and disseminate that information sooner rather than later, because then the infrastructure that we put in now that is required will help deliver the future.
Very good point on vehicle data. Massive opportunities to use that data to potentially replace spending money on infrastructure. Hence why we're doing the vehicle data discovery with CCAV. Great feedback as well on the importance of these events. Always good to hear. It makes me think that actually we maybe do need to do something on CAVs at a future event, which we'll discuss amongst ourselves, amongst the Secretariat, about that for a future event.
We've done one on CAV before, but I think we do need to refresh things as things keep changing so quickly. But it is really good feedback from the Transport Data Initiative point of view, because through the work that we've done with local authorities, I've said this before in other events, we kind of see in three groups of local authorities. There's those who are doing it, and a lot of you were in the room. There's those who want to do it and are not quite sure where to start, and there's those in the very small group who don't really care. They're quite happy with their one bus a week, and Mrs. Miggins gets to a bridge club. But we are also finding through events like this and through other opportunities that those in the larger group who are doing it are supporting those who want to do it and don't know how to get there. And we are seeing that. I mean, well, this is the 9th event, and we're seeing it more and more through these events and through collaborations and some of the other forums. So, you know, it really is working, but we need to encourage that more and more so that that collaboration happens and you guys talk to each other even more and start sharing some of the knowledge that you've got.
I mean, adding to that, it's really good to see such a high turnout today as well, because I know everyone's, you know, busy day jobs, you know, justifying the travel expenses coming to another city. So actually it's really, really pleasing to have such a great attendance today, and it makes us think about, you know, how the importance to us to keep doing this and resourcing this, and any sort of general feedback you have on themes that you would like us to present to you and to have a dialogue would be appreciated.
And so just to complement, you talk about in-vehicle data, but obviously there's also vehicles infrastructure data, and that is something which is potentially the local authority gift that is in our CITS pilot trials, which Darren mentions, and that's potentially a very rich source of information for local authority about the transport network. So with goodwill and good funding ahead of us, we may also do a connected vehicle data strategy for the infrastructure to vehicle, which will look on a national basis and how that complements the vehicle data and vehicle data.
Yeah. Can I go to the guy with the green shirt?
Yeah, I think you've actually answered the question.
Oh, excellent. Oh.
We've actually got a question from the live stream, so we'll do that one next and then go back to the floor. We've got a question from Craig Newton. I'm not entirely sure where he's from, so hopefully he'll comment and tell us. But he said, has there been any thought towards providing guidance to the local authorities on the format that certain data should be held? There may be reluctance to invest in a certain software and hardware, 40 ROs for example, when this may not be the way that the department wants it to proceed.
That is an excellent question. So that links to the work we've commissioned the British Standards Institute to do for us on sort of scoping out what we need to do in data standards. So that could be codes of practice, that could be formats in terms of metadata, etc. So that's something that we are on, because that's impediment to sharing data and would make people's lives a lot easier, I suspect. Do you want to?
Yeah, there are already a few projects. One of my team's remit will be to work on data standards. So, you know, there's a big interest in collaborating with local authorities about this. I think local authorities are already aware of certain standards. So first of all, there's NAPTA, and Nick mentioned earlier. We are currently working on 2 projects. Colleagues in the roads group are working on Street Manager, which is like it's just I think in alpha, and it's about allowing local authorities to share more easily data about roadworks. And I think so. The thinking around standards is developing there. But even bus open data has a huge impact on standards in terms of both bus stops, bus routes, timetables, fares. So I think what we need to do is probably to keep, you know, being the sort of focal point for standards, and the benefits will come up. Sorry.
So, and I just want to add there as well is the fact that we have to be very careful how we do this as well. The fact that we just don't design a standard that then fixes things as they are. We have to come up with ways of actually that evolve and are agile because of the pace of change. So, for example, we're part of the scoping study with the BSI is to look at our current data standard suite fit for purpose, given the sort of the rise of micromobility solutions, you know, electric scooters and stuff like that. How do you know, we've got standards for bus, but can you apply them to all these other modes that, you know, that may morph into something else in a year or 2 time? So it's making sure that we don't fix things in stone as well, so we don't inhibit change and evolution.
Just a quick question for Carla. You mentioned something around Innovate UK, some new funding streams with HE. Have you got any more details on that?
Thank you for that question. It's almost as if it was planned. So Graham mentioned a few times about local authorities working with Highways England and that collaboration. So I'm really pleased to announce that we have already opened 2 competitions for Highways England. It's a £20 million pot, and the 2 competitions are available to everybody, whether you're at feasibility stage or at later stage development. So it covers everybody, and all of you can apply. A local authority can lead, which is quite unusual, but a local authority can lead the competition as long as in your application you talk about how you would lead it to commercialisation later on. But the themes, the 6 themes, I'll run through them really quick. Sorry. Design, construction and maintenance, connected autonomous vehicles, this is around getting the roads ready for CAV, customer mobility, energy environment, operations, which is really key to this because this is about getting better data quality on our roads and assets. And the 6th theme is air quality, so you can bid into any of those themes. So if you want more details, come and talk to me later on, or it will be on the website, but you will get 100% funding. And I really encourage local authorities, again, going back to Paul's question, local authorities to work with SMEs, so please really do take advantage. This is Highways England giving some money out.
Did you say when it's closing?
It closes in May, I think. I should know that. But it closes in May. It's open now, so.
Walter.
Hello, Stuart Neston.
Sorry.
Services. I've read an article about Paris licensing these electric scooters, and that the data from the scooters was then being made available to the city and French state. When can we expect electric scooters coming to UK roads and the data from them being available?
Oh, these are good questions. So, they're technically illegal, aren't they? Are they? I don't know. Okay.
No, I think they might be at the moment.
They're illegal. Yeah, I did. So I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert in that, and I suspect in the UK they're technically illegal, even though I do see them regularly on my commute into work. They have been taken off. Taken off is probably not the right phrasing. The use of them has expanded massively in the States, and I know we had conversations with the LA Transport Authority about how they're collecting data on that through APIs and stuff like that. And I know there's interest in other city regions in the UK about doing something similar. So it's one of those things we're looking into. It's all again feeds into the Future Mobility Regulatory Review about how we regulate such things to make sure that the benefits are there, but also there's safety issues, and so can't give you a definitive answer, but we're on it, and there's different ways that you could actually take the data and use it. Yet to be decided.
So it's on the radar.
It's definitely on the radar. Yeah.
Walter.
Is Walter?
Yeah. It's got a flick switch. Okay. Is it working? Got the switch. That's
That one.
Yep.
Yeah. I wanted just to go back to a question earlier, or perhaps two that were covered, just to understand a bit more detail of the work that is planned and going on within both BSI and the LAMP project on standards. The thing about standards, as we heard an earlier TDI, is there are so many of them. One of the reasons there are so many of them is because of the different layers of the protocol stack, whether you're talking right down at the connectivity, connection type standards, down to the type of data and how that data is used, the metadata of the data, all of those things. And at some levels, at many levels, those issues do impact on the economies of scale that then result. So, for example, if you take the current competitions that have just been mentioned, if we end up with sort of 20 different projects all using completely different standards, we could find local authorities preferentially then going down 20 different routes rather than moving towards what offers the real economic gain, where we could see both economies of purchasing power, economies of purchasing through different companies offering different solutions but all using the same standards, delivering interoperability.
I mean, I'm saying this from sort of looking back at the history of sort of, 10 years of funding for smart city projects, where we now have many cities around the country that have done those projects, maybe have a local data store, not necessarily transport, maybe other areas as well. There is room potentially to actually connect that stuff together and bring it together, which could actually give us quite a leap forward in terms of accelerating making Britain the best place to do transport digitally. I'm just wondering how the work that's being done in BSI and LAMP will play into that big picture.
Again, a very good question. So, also an interesting point about layers, because there is so many different layers to the standard stuff, and I'm really glad that I'm actually not writing and doing that work, because it's so complicated. I'd rather be on this side of the table for that project, because there's so many different ways you can cut it. I think one of the useful outputs from that would be some guidance about what standards to use by local authorities, but also ourselves. So when we do these various competitions and stuff like that, saying that actually in the specification, the guidance notes, is the fact that you have to follow these standards, and which are X, Y, and Z, and that would be a requirement. Did you want to mention something on LAMP?
Yeah. So I think to go back to the data competition that we talked about earlier, and the CITS competitions, we do ask people when they bid to tell us that they will be using open standards, and we would look quite poorly on a bid that tried to use some proprietary standards where it wasn't needed. And certainly in the data bid, we've asked people who are looking at parking projects, I think Graham mentioned earlier, to recognise the fact that there are emerging parking standards, and we strongly wish people would use them. So that's part of it. I think in terms of LAMP, and in terms of this kind of working at a higher level of the sort of data stack, there are no shortage of standards. We probably don't need to invent any more. But as I think Matt just said, we need guidance. I think LAMP will look more at providing that guidance than writing new standards. And I think trying to set the standards for particular types of data, trying to set a common framework, but within the standards landscape that already exists. At what level, though, will those be?
Well, I think as I hope I conveyed in my presentation, for a lot of areas of stuff that we want to connect, the detailed, the sort of electromechanical level standards, the standards that work at a very low level, are already there. We already have UTMC, we already have systems for linking electronic ticket machines to central databases on buses and so on and so forth. What LAMP is about the high level standards that allow you to blend data out of these individual silos. So LAMP will be looking at that high level about metadata standards and about the types of standards that are applicable for data across numerous sort of source areas.
So it would be covering things like the publishing and discovery of data.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, rather than the detailed standard about what where in the IP stack you are, what comms standards you're using, what data, that sort of thing. That for a lot of areas is already in place. And one of the things I should have mentioned, but didn't think it was really relevant, about the SIMEC report. And we looked at the SIMEC report in terms of use cases, but another part of the SIMEC report also links the emerging possibilities of connected vehicles with a whole suite of ETSI and SEN standards, which again specifies that. So again, it's about understanding there are standards there, and what we need to do is we need to direct people to specify the right standards and understand that they do exist, and there is a model that you should be following.
And just to add on that, as another part of the BSI work is looking at sort of what governance arrangements there need to be around standards, to make sure they're future-proof, and the fact that they're how they get changed, control procedures and stuff like that, because there's a whole kind of governance suite around it as well that's really important.
I was just going to come back on the crowdsourcing. The Geospatial Commission had a specific project around geospatial crowdsourced data that just ended in January. It's £1.5 million. The ODI did a sort of proof of concept call before that, so there's quite a big movement for crowdsourced geospatial data, and there's going to be at least about 5 projects that will happen over the next year in it. Some of those are definitely going to be in transport. We did a proof of concept one specifically around cycling and crowdsourcing data, and it's so I think there's cycling in particular, there seems to be a big push for crowdsourced data, particularly in forming policy. But that's definitely an area the Geospatial Commission are really interested in. So it's just something very important to be aware of.
Thank you, Laverne. So that's really good intel. We're increasingly working more closely with the Geospatial Commission on all this kind of stuff, and I understand that cycling is a particularly hot spot for that kind of crowdsourcing because of that kind of community aspect to cycling. So that's helpful. Thank you.
I think the only issue with crowdsourcing, and we've learned in the past couple of years, is that we need to maintain public confidence that the data is not going to be abused in any way, and we realise in talking to people who work in the field that even something as simple as cycling data may be, looked with a bit of suspicion by the public. So it's about developing that conversation as well with the people so that we maintain trust and we can use the data for good purposes.
And I imagine also you have to be really careful about what biases are in that data as well. And I'm not an expert in that, but how you actually deal with those.
Yeah, just a question about how we take all these really good ideas and actually roll them out to being business as usual. So funding is being made available through bids, whether that's Innovate UK or another route. You get 100 applications for funding, you fund 10. Those 10 successful applicants will deliver, and 3 of those 10 applicants will prove a very good business case for UK PLC. So how does the panel see the rest of the local authority community picking up those good ideas and getting the funding to actually deliver those ideas that have proven to be good value? If I can use as a possible example what we've seen with air quality recently, it's taken a very short length of time to actually get from UK PLC to acknowledge that there's a problem, to identify a very small number of possible solutions, get a business case put together, get bids in and start to roll these out. Is that potentially the way that we ought to look at data collection, data manipulation, use of data as a business case going forward?
That's a really good point. Very good point. I think I'm certainly aware that we need to better be. I think I mentioned this earlier about better capturing the lessons from these various competitions and pilots and funded projects. And I really like the stuff that Graham and his team have been doing with a local data competition that's going to be announced shortly. Is actually to get everyone together and actually disseminate those lessons, capture those lessons, and help us form the business case. And that's something that I think perhaps maybe has been lacking in other areas. And I just recently was in the DFT's Office for Science, and the Professor Blythe, the Chief Scientific Advisor there, was, basically you've got to test this stuff in the real world. You can talk about the theories about this, that and the other, so until you get in the real world and test it, that's when you find out the things, and that's the kind of thing that we need to do. I mentioned also Transport Research Innovation Board, TRIB, that could be a mechanism for doing that. As you say, the air quality could be a model, but I imagine there's others. So this is the kind of stuff that we need to think about, because we're pumping loads of money in, and it's how we can actually do proper evaluation, but build that evaluation into the project.
I'd just excuse me. I'd also say that yes, we might get 100 applicants and we can fund 10, but we don't just then forget about the other 90. Especially if they're very high scoring, and to be honest, the standard is going up and up. So we do maintain contact as much as we possibly can with the high scoring ones that we weren't able to fund. We do try and provide other opportunities, whether we get them onto a stand at an event or introduce them to other competitions. But I would say that if you apply for something and you don't get funding first time, it doesn't mean that your project was no good. It could just mean for that particular project, that particular competition, we've run out of money. But there are other competitions that you can apply into, not just for Innovate, but DFT and other organisations. So I would persuade you to keep plugging away, especially, look at the feedback that you get from an application, especially if it's a high scoring one, then the chances are you would be able to get funding elsewhere, and look for those opportunities where you can showcase at events and things like that. So we do try and support those who didn't quite get funding, and sometimes money is found down the back of the sofa. So, we do try and support where we can.
Thank you. Yep, Darren?
Yeah, so to pick that point up, particularly around the connected ITS competitions that we've run through the traffic and technology team in DFT, those projects are not about funding people to go off and build business as usual systems. They're about research. They're about funding trials that allow us to see what works and see what doesn't work. And the thing we want out of that really is the ability to generate guidance, the ability to generate evaluation techniques, the ability to get local authorities talking to each other about technology, which is why, for us, the outputs from those are things like the evaluation project that we now have with Newcastle University, which is about taking the work we've done and working out what methods we should use to evaluate CITS as a business case, as an everyday activity. So we can, in the future, start to evaluate proposals from authorities for CITS schemes in the same way that we use WebTag to evaluate other schemes. It's about forming things like the Transport Technology Forum and the CITS groups, which is about ensuring that where we fund best practice, that's then disseminated at a community level between the authorities. And the position we want to get to is that when you use the types of funding you use now to do things, whether it's your own internal funding, whether it's maintenance funding, whether it's things like the National Productivity Investment Fund, whether it's money you're securing from developers to undertake highway improvements, when you spend that money in the future, we want to have CITS available as an alternative to building, to laying tarmac or pouring concrete. At the moment it isn't, because it's not well known enough, it's not well understood enough by us in terms of how we develop policy and evaluation. It's not understood well enough in terms of local authorities, in terms of what the possibilities are and how it can deliver. So the research work isn't really about, at the moment, funding usable citywide systems. It's about generating that environment where you can think about those opportunities as an investment decision in the round as you think about investing in highways and transport. And that's where we want to get to, really.
And it must be said that sometimes the funding is actually used to build new parts of infrastructure that then is used for the business as usual. So I wouldn't be so negative about, like we're not funding business as usual. It becomes part of it sometimes.
Any more questions before we break for lunch?
The key word being lunch.
Yeah.
So I was just going to add to that, as being one of the CITS funding recipients. Just leading on from what Dan said, this stuff is actually that research and finding those things out. It's difficult, it's tough. Actually we had a year's project plan to deliver, from the money we got. That's now turned into 2, if not 3 years of pushing some of those boundaries, engaging with suppliers, finding out the market isn't quite ready in some areas, that there's issues that have to be overcome. It's not in the traditional project management where you go, right, we're going to get this money and deliver this and this by then. We've had to reset our expectations, Graham's expectations. We're pushing the boundaries and trying all these new things. You have to have a different approach and not beat yourself up when you don't fail. And I started to do that after 6 months thinking, why can't we deliver this stuff? It should be easy. It's not, it's difficult.
And that's the nature of innovation. So, we understand that sometimes projects do get delayed and that kind of thing, because curveballs happen, and especially in the unknown, which is what we're dabbling in, really. That happens increasingly, so we're aware of it.
And also, occasionally here, the thing to do is fail fast, and learn the lessons and move on quickly. And this is all about the risks and about innovation, that some things aren't going to work, but you learn that it doesn't work, and that's great. And then we just need to be better at telling people what doesn't work, as well as what does work. The panel? So we're going to break for lunch. I suggest we reconvene at 1:45. We've got a session this afternoon on the discovery scoping, which involves a web-based tool. So if you could make sure you're linked onto the, attached onto the Wi-Fi here, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, on your phones, it's fine on your phones, but the passwords are around the room, so just make sure that you can get onto Wi-Fi on your phone or your laptop, or other devices are available.
Thanks very much.